I'd always known the woods behind my grandmother's house had a reputation. Folks in the valley whispered about strange families who lived far from the road, far from the world. As a kid, I'd laugh it off, thinking it was just old tales meant to scare newcomers or keep us from wandering too far. But the night I first saw them, I realized some stories weren't meant to be jokes. I was taking my usual shortcut home, the one that cut through the hollow where the trees grew close and thick, blotting out the moonlight. The path was uneven, roots twisting underfoot, the smell of damp earth thick in the cool night air. That's when I saw the first one, a shadow among shadows crouched low, watching me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the branches or a reflection of moonlight. Then another figure moved, deliberate and silent, gliding along the underbrush in a way that felt impossible for a normal person. My heart hammered, and I slowed my steps, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. These weren't kids playing at hide and seek. They weren't laughing, weren't calling to each other. Their movements were precise, almost predatory, and I could feel their eyes on me even when I couldn't see them clearly. One stepped into a faint patch of moonlight. He, or maybe it was a she, was thin, ragged, hair long and stringy, clothes torn and filthy. Their eyes caught the silver glow and reflected it back at me, sharp, unnerving. I froze, a low guttural noise breaking the night's quiet. It wasn't a shout, wasn't a growl, just something between a sigh and a hiss that seemed to rattle through the air around me. I ran. Not a casual jog, but a full sprint, leaping over roots and brambles, lungs burning, hearing them shift in the woods behind me, just at the edge of my perception. The hollows swallowed sound, but I could sense them following, tracking. By the time I reached the clearing near my grandmother's porch, I was shaking, heart pounding, breath ragged. I didn't dare look back. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow in the corners of the room seemed alive. I told myself I imagined it, that the adrenaline had made my eyes play tricks. But deep down, I knew otherwise. In the days that followed, I caught glimpses of them again. Sometimes from the attic window, sometimes at the edge of the property when I went outside to fetch firewood. Always silent. Always watching. I spoke to some of the older folks in town, trying to understand what I'd seen. They hesitated, exchanged looks, and then told me about families who had chosen to vanish from society decades ago, living in hollows and deep woods, surviving off what the land provided, avoiding roads, schools, and strangers. Most people left them alone, not out of kindness, but out of fear. You didn't pry into their lives. You didn't speak of them too loudly. I tried to keep my distance, but curiosity, foolish or otherwise, led me back on another night. This time I lingered at the edge of the hollow, watching from the shadows. And there they were, moving like phantoms between the trees, limbs twisting and bending in ways that seemed almost inhuman, faces obscured by grime and shadows. I felt like a trespasser in a place that had never belonged to me, and yet a part of me wanted to see more, to understand them, to confirm that what I was witnessing was real. That curiosity nearly cost me. One figure broke the cover of trees, just enough for me to catch the outline, and I swear I could see recognition, or maybe awareness, passing over its face. I ran again, faster this time, heart slamming against my ribs, lungs on fire, until I reached the light of the porch. Days turned into weeks, and each night I could feel them closer, not in the hollows behind the house, but in the subtle signs they left. Footprints too large for normal children, scraps of clothing in odd places, the sudden absence of wildlife in certain patches of the forest. I couldn't sleep properly. The forest itself seemed to hum with their presence, a low, constant tension that pressed in on the edges of my mind. I realized that the feeling wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was recognition that some parts of Appalachia remained untouched, unbroken by roads, cell towers, or society, and that some lives had evolved in isolation for so long they felt entirely foreign to anyone else. I tried to explain it to friends, but they laughed or shook their heads. Feral people, they said, thinking it was a joke. But there's a weight to it that laughter can't touch, a gravity that keeps your chest tight and your pulse high when the wind rustles leaves at night. Sometimes, even during the day, I catch a movement at the tree lane, a glimpse of thin, ragged limbs slipping between the trees. And I remember the first time I saw them, the eyes reflecting moonlight, the guttural noise cutting through the quiet of the hollow. They aren't just shadows. They're reminders, lingering proof that the world we think we know only exists where we choose to see it. I avoid the hollow now, mostly. I take the long way around when I go to town. But the forest remembers me. I can feel it when the wind presses against the windows or the trees sway too rhythmically. Sometimes, on nights thick with mist, I swear I can hear them whispering, just beyond sight, waiting for me to cross that boundary again. And maybe I will, some night, drawn by curiosity or foolishness. But when I do, I know the woods will be waiting, as they always have, patient and silent, hiding lives that refuse to be understood, moving like shadows at the edge of everything we think is safe. Even now, thinking back, the hollow feels alive. Not with animals, not with the usual sounds of the forest, but with something older, stranger, and unyielding. And I know that no matter how far I walk, how many years pass, that night will never leave me. They're still out there, still watching, and I carry the memory of that low guttural noise and the reflection of eyes in moonlight wherever I go. I didn't notice her the first few nights. Living alone out in the woods, you get used to the dark pressing up against the windows, the trees swaying just enough to make you question what you saw in the corner of your eye. My cabin sat a good mile off the main road, tucked so deep into the pines that even cell service struggled to reach me. It was the kind of place you moved to when you wanted quiet, when you wanted to disappear for a while and convince yourself the world wasn't as loud or as complicated as you remembered. But the woods are never truly quiet. They have a pulse, a breath, a way of reminding you that you're never as alone as you think. The first time I saw her, I'd just woken up from a dead sleep, the kind where you don't even remember closing your eyes. Something, maybe a shift in the wind or a faint sound against the siding, had pulled me awake. I rolled over, expecting to see nothing but my own reflection in the window. Instead, there was a face staring in. A pale shape, two hollow eyes fixed directly on me. I jolted upright, heart hammering so hard I thought it might shake the bed frame. But when I blinked, she was gone. I told myself it was just the leftover fog of sleep, a smear of moonlight, a trick of the brain trying to make sense of shadows. I had no reason to think anyone would be out there. No neighbors. No hikers. Nobody. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I saw them. Footprints in the frost, small and bare, leading right up to the window where I'd seen the face. The prints stopped there, then vanished into the tree line, the tracks uneven and scattered like the person who made them didn't fully understand how to move on open ground. I crouched down, hand hovering just above the frozen soil, and felt a cold dread settle in the center of my chest. Someone had been standing there. Someone had been watching. The next night, I left the blinds closed. I told myself it was nothing. Kids maybe, or some lost wanderer who got confused in the dark. But that excuse felt thin. Nobody wandered this far into the woods accidentally. And the prints were too small for any grown adult. I tried to sleep, but every creak, every shift in the wind made me open my eyes again. I could feel a presence outside, like something pressing its weight against the cabin walls, waiting. I didn't dare look. On the fourth night, I couldn't take not knowing anymore. I sat in the dark with the blinds cracked just an inch, watching. My heart beat so loudly it filled my ears, drowning out the soft rustle of leaves outside. Hours passed. My eyes burned. But I didn't move. And somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, she stepped into view. She had dirt tangled in her hair, strands hanging like brittle vines over a face too thin, too hollow. She didn't blink, didn't tilt her head, didn't breathe in any way I could see. She just stared. Her eyes were dark pits, wide and unblinking, fixed directly on the spot where I watched from behind the blinds. It was like she knew I was there, even though I'd barely moved. I felt a numbness crawl down my arms as I realized she might have known all along. The past nights. The past moments I thought I'd seen something shift outside. She wasn't approaching for the first time. She was waiting for me to finally accept it. I stayed frozen like that for I don't know how long, afraid that even shifting my weight would trigger something in her. But she didn't move. Not once. Not even when the sky started to pale with sunrise. Only when the first birds began their cautious songs did she silently step back and walk into the woods, disappearing as naturally as a shadow. I wanted to believe she was alone, that she was just one strange person living rough in the woods, but the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. There had been stories in town, quiet ones told only by the older folks who still remembered what this place used to be, about a family that lived off the grid long before the term existed. Something happened, a scandal, a death. Nobody ever agreed on the details. But instead of leaving town, the family had simply faded into the forest, building shelters in caves and abandoned shacks, trapping what little they needed, raising children far from anyone who could interfere. People claimed they died out, or moved, or starved, but there was always a hesitation in the voice of anyone telling it, like they didn't fully believe the comfort of their own story. After seeing that girl at my window, I didn't believe it either. Over the next week, the sounds grew stranger. Soft knocks at the walls around midnight. Faint scratching near the back door. Quiet, breathy whispers that blended with the wind but didn't belong to it. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that living alone for too long was wearing on my nerves. But the footprints kept coming back. Some nights there were 2 sets. Some nights 3. All small. All barefoot. One night, the whispering grew louder, more distinct. Not words I could understand, but a low guttural humming that rose and fell in uneven breaths. It circled the cabin, drifting from window to window like someone dragging their voice across the glass. I sat on the floor in the dark, back pressed against the wall, staring at the faint outline of the door and wondering if the latch was strong enough to keep whatever was outside from coming in. When the noises finally stopped, I didn't move for nearly an hour. Then, from the silence, came a single tap at the window beside me. Not a knock. Not a scratch. A soft, intentional tap. I didn't look. I couldn't. I knew what I'd see. The next morning, I packed a bag, drove into town, and told myself I'd stay a few nights at the small inn near the highway. But even there, lying in a bed surrounded by 4 solid walls and the muffled sound of passing cars, I felt watched. Like someone was standing just outside the window, waiting for me to return to the woods. I stayed in town 2 nights. On the 3rd, I went back for the rest of my things. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. No footprints. No scratches. No broken branches in the yard. It was like nobody had ever been there. But on the window, the one beside my bed, smudged fingerprints streaked the glass in uneven, muddy lines. Small prints, the size of a child's hand. They were arranged in a way that made my stomach twist. 5 prints arched, like someone had leaned forward and pressed both hands to the window to peer inside one last time. I stood there in the doorway, staring at the glass, knowing I wasn't alone in those woods. Not then, not now, not ever. Even after I left that cabin for good, I carried the weight of those silent eyes with me. Sometimes, even miles away, I catch myself checking the windows at night. Sometimes I see nothing. Sometimes I see shapes. And sometimes, I feel that same soft tap against the glass, reminding me that she never really stopped watching. We drove past the old barn on the edge of town hundreds of times growing up, each of us daring the others to get closer, leaning out the window just to glimpse the sagging roof or the dark slats that rattled in the wind. Nobody spoke about what had gone on inside. There were whispers, little fragments of stories from older kids and passing neighbors, always vague, always warning us to stay away. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're a teenager with more nerves than sense. That summer evening, the air sticky with heat and the scent of wildflowers, we finally gave in to it. My friend Mark and I parked the truck just down the hill, behind the patch of pines, and crept toward the barn, our bare feet crunching over dry leaves and broken twigs. The sun had sunk below the ridgeline, leaving a dim glow that made the shadows long and twisted. At first, it was silent. Nothing but the occasional sigh of wind through the cracks in the old siding. I felt a chill crawl up my spine despite the heat, that kind of unease that comes when your brain knows you shouldn't be here but your curiosity refuses to listen. Then I saw it, a faint glow, reddish and flickering from inside the barn. My heart hammered. I whispered for Mark to look, and he froze beside me, wide-eyed. Something moved inside. Not just the flames of a fire. Figures crouched around it, their movements slow and deliberate, shadows bending and flickering as the light caught them. Faces smeared with mud, the dark streaks twisting over eyes and mouths. making them look like carved masks more than human faces. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. It was the kind of sight that pins you to the spot, the mind refusing to let go because it needs to understand what it's seeing. Low chanting began, barely audible at first, a rhythm that rose and fell like the swell of wind through the hollow. Mark grabbed my arm, his fingers tight, but I shook him off without realizing. The chant grew clearer, the words guttural and unfamiliar, some syllables I could feel in my chest, vibrating like a pulse. They weren't kids. Not teenagers messing around. Not pranksters. They were adults. Men and women, maybe older, moving with intent, living a life none of us could ever imagine, hidden from the rest of the world. The smell hit me next. Smoke, yes, but mixed with something fouler, earthy, and decayed. I gagged and stumbled back a step, suddenly aware of how close I'd crept. My skin prickled, the hair on my arms standing straight. The barn itself seemed to hold its breath, the air outside thick and still, the forest around us silent, as if the entire valley knew what was happening inside and refused to acknowledge it. I wanted to tear my eyes away, but I couldn't. One of them lifted a hand toward the fire, and the flames licked it, orange and yellow, throwing shadows across the others. They moved in a pattern, circling, kneeling, murmuring, and my chest ached with the recognition that this wasn't play. This was life. Their life. The part of Appalachia no one in town spoke of, but everyone somehow knew was real. Mark whispered then, voice trembling, "We should go." I wanted to argue, to tell him yes, but my feet refused to obey. The figures moved closer to the fire, their chanting dipping and rising, the rhythm unsettling, hypnotic. One of them glanced up, and in the flickering light, I saw eyes. Not just ordinary eyes, but eyes that had learned the woods, the silence, the secrets. Eyes that could see outsiders like us and know we didn't belong. I felt seen, naked in my fear, and it was worse than if they had screamed or charged. They merely acknowledged me. Finally, Mark tugged again, harder this time, and I snapped out of it. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, and we ran without looking back, feet pounding on the dirt road, lungs burning, the chant fading into the trees behind us. The memory of that night has never left me. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see the glow of that fire, the shadows of those crouched figures, the way the barn seemed to hold the world at bay. The forest still hums with their presence. Sometimes, passing by that edge of town, I feel the hair on the back of my neck rise, a pull in my chest that warns me they're still there, still watching, still living in ways we'll never fully understand. The barn hasn't changed. The roof sags a little more each year, the paint peeled and gray. But on certain evenings, when the wind is just right and the smoke drifts in from who knows where, I swear you can see faint lights flickering from the windows. And sometimes, just sometimes, a rhythm of chanting drifts across the valley, carried by the wind, so soft you think it's a trick of the trees, but your chest knows better. The town avoids the place, as they always have, and the older folks refuse to speak of it openly. But everyone knows. Everyone who grew up there knows. Those people, whoever they are, have never left. I sometimes think about going back, to see if they'll even notice me this time, or if they'll recognize a stranger in the shadows as nothing worth their attention. But then I remember the fear in my chest that night, the smell of mud and smoke and something older, the way the silence outside seemed heavier than air, pressing in on our ears and minds. That fear wasn't from monsters. It wasn't from anything that could be explained easily. It was from knowing that someone else had been living this life for decades, just beyond the places we feel safe, moving through the darkness and rituals in a world we'll never touch. And maybe that's the worst part. Not that we saw them. Not that we ran and shivered in our beds afterward. It's that their existence doesn't need to frighten anyone. They don't care. They simply are, part of the hidden rhythm of this land, shaping it quietly, invisibly. We only think of it as frightening because we can't understand it, because it reminds us of what hides in the corners of our civilization, in the hollows and barns and forests, things we glance at in passing but never acknowledge, things that outlast towns, rumors, and time itself. Even now, when I drive past the barn, I slow down. I glance at the sagging roof, the dark slats, and I feel that same pulse in my chest. Sometimes I see shadows shifting inside, faint and deliberate, just beyond the glassless windows. And though I never step closer, I know they're still there, still crouched around some fire, still chanting in low, incomprehensible rhythms that are older than any of us, older than the town, older than the memory of us as children daring to watch. I was hiking alone along the ridge just outside of town, the trail barely more than a worn path through the pines, when I first heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was the usual sounds of the forest, branches breaking under squirrels or deer, but the rhythm was different, deliberate, too measured for the uneven ground. Crunch, snap, shift, pause. Then again. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, always careful, always deliberate. My heart started hammering, and I stopped completely, straining to hear over the wind through the pines and the low hum of cicadas in the distance. I called out once, my voice cracking in the dry air, but nothing answered. Just the faint echo of my own words bouncing back, and then silence. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it, that the loneliness of the ridge and the isolation had made me overactive, that I was projecting my fear onto the forest. But the footsteps continued. They weren't hurried. They weren't hasty. They were steady, deliberate, and impossibly quiet for anyone of normal size. My skin crawled, and I clutched my walking stick like a lifeline, inching forward, glancing between the trees. That's when I saw them, or at least glimpsed them. Pale figures, thin, moving through the woods with a speed and grace that made the shadows flicker unnaturally. They darted between the trunks, never fully revealing themselves, always just enough for me to know I wasn't imagining it. I froze, my chest tight, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. They weren't children playing games. They weren't hikers lost or wandering. These were adults, living completely detached from civilization, blending into the ridge as naturally as the rocks and trees themselves. Their movements were deliberate, careful, as though they knew every contour of the land, every fallen branch, every shadow that might betray their presence. And yet, despite being so close, I couldn't hear voices, couldn't hear breathing, only the crunch of their careful steps over dry leaves and twigs. I kept moving, slowly, barely daring to breathe, scanning the ridge for signs. That's when I found the scraps of clothing. A torn sleeve snagged on a low branch, a fragment of a canvas bag left near a rock outcropping. Tools, handmade, crude, but functional, left in small clearings as though abandoned in a hurry or intentionally left for someone to see. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a wilderness, not just an empty ridge. This was a place they owned, a place they inhabited as fully as any house or cabin, and we, the few who wandered there, were intruders. The sun was dipping low behind the western ridges, casting long shadows that turned the forest into a dark lattice of shapes and movement. I could feel them watching. I wasn't just moving through the woods, I was moving through their territory. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, made my pulse spike. I started to understand the stories the older hikers whispered. Disappearances, strange sightings, glimpses of pale, wiry figures darting through the trees, and the sudden, inexplicable feeling of being observed. I had felt it all that afternoon, and it was like a weight pressing down from every tree, every shadow. At one point, I stumbled into a small clearing, and I swear I saw one of them standing perfectly still at the far edge, half hidden behind a tree. It tilted its head as I stepped forward, and in that brief instant, I felt a wave of recognition, of awareness, as though it knew me in a way no human should. My mouth went dry, my limbs frozen. I didn't move for what felt like minutes. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone, slipping back into the trees with a silence that made my skin crawl. I didn't stay much longer after that. I retraced my steps, keeping my eyes on every shadow, listening to the forest with a new, acute awareness. The ridge had always been wild, but now it felt alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. The wind carried sounds that weren't quite natural, almost like whispered warnings in a language I couldn't understand. When I finally reached the trailhead and the distant hum of the town's traffic, I felt the tension lift slightly, but not entirely. The ridge hadn't let me go. I could still feel their presence, a lingering weight pressing against the edges of my mind. Weeks later, I returned during daylight, trying to convince myself I'd overreacted. But even in the sun, the forest felt different. The clearings were empty, yes, but there were traces. Footprints pressed into the dirt, the same tools left half-buried, signs of habitation that refused to be ignored. I could almost imagine them watching me from the cover of the trees, eyes tracking every movement, never revealing themselves fully, just enough to remind me that this land belonged to them. The ridge wasn't just a trail or a hike. It was a home, a living place for people who had adapted in ways no one in town could comprehend. People who treated human intruders with a patience and quiet observation that was far more unsettling than any confrontation could be. I've never returned at night. I avoid the trail entirely, taking longer paths around it whenever I hike. But sometimes, lying in bed with the windows open just a crack, I swear I can hear the steps again. Not loud, not close, just a measured, deliberate crunch, like someone walking over leaves far enough away to be hidden but close enough that your mind can't ignore it. I tell myself it's the wind. I tell myself it's a deer or a raccoon. But I know better. Those footsteps aren't of this world, at least not the world I know. They belong to the ridge, to the people who haunt it, to the feral residents who watch, wait, and live in ways we'll never understand. Every now and then I think about going back just to see them, to understand. But the truth is, I don't want to. There's a knowledge in seeing them, in knowing they exist, that leaves you with something heavy lodged in your chest. A reminder that civilization isn't everywhere, that some lives persist beyond our understanding, beyond our rules, and that the world is bigger, and far stranger, than the boundaries we set for ourselves. Even now, when the wind rattles the trees outside my window, I can feel the memory of those steps pressing in. It's not fear anymore. It's a quiet awareness that they are still out there, still moving, still living, and that the ridge remembers everyone who dares walk it. And maybe, sometimes, it even waits. I always thought the tales about wild children running in the woods were just stories adults told to scare kids, or to make sense of the strange things you sometimes glimpsed at the edge of the forest. Living on the outskirts of town, we were surrounded by acres of untamed land, dense with pines and hollows that stretched for miles. Most of the time, the woods felt safe in their own way, alive with birds and rustling leaves, but there was always a whisper underneath it, a quiet warning you couldn't name. I learned that whisper too late. It was late afternoon, the sun low and red in the sky, when I set out for a hunting trip. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder, a bag of supplies bouncing against my side, and the usual sense of isolation settled over me as I moved deeper into the backwoods. The trail had narrowed into a barely discernible path, overgrown and littered with fallen branches. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought they were raccoons or some kind of deer, but they moved differently. Quick, almost fluid, and with a focus that seemed deliberate. Two small figures darted across a clearing, completely naked, their skin smudged with dirt, hair tangled and wild. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming that I shouldn't be here, that I shouldn't watch. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, locked on me as if they had known I'd appear, as if the forest itself had sent me into their path. They didn't make a sound, not a giggle, not a shriek, not even the shuffle of bare feet against leaves. Their movement was so swift and precise that it was almost unnatural. I tried to take a step back quietly, but the dry leaves betrayed me with a faint crunch. In an instant, their heads turned, and they followed me. Not with a rush, but with a careful, stalking patience that made my stomach knot. I backed away slowly, trying not to run, trying not to frighten them further, though I had no idea what I feared more, their observation or the unknown intentions behind it. And then I noticed the smallest details, the sharp intelligence in their eyes, the way their hands flexed almost like they were ready for anything, the way they moved in tandem with one another, perfectly synchronized, like creatures who had learned the forest as a home and school combined. It was terrifying and mesmerizing at the same time. I realized they were not lost or abandoned. They were thriving in ways I couldn't understand, adapting, surviving, learning. Later that night, back at home, I tried to tell my father what I'd seen. He didn't look surprised, only solemn. He told me the stories I'd laughed at as a kid were true. Families had retreated long ago from the edges of civilization, raising children in the woods without schools, without neighbors, without contact with anyone else. They were unseen, unacknowledged, a part of the wilderness that the town had learned to ignore. But ignoring them didn't make them disappear, and it certainly didn't make them harmless. The forest remembers everything, he said, and the children remember it too. After that day, I never ventured that far into the woods alone again. But even when I stayed on the familiar trails, I couldn't shake the memory of their eyes wide and calculating, following my every move. Sometimes at dusk, when the light falls unevenly through the pines and everything in the woods goes quiet, I can hear the faint patter of tiny feet, moving in ways that shouldn't be possible for children raised in any normal life. The sound is soft, deliberate, a rhythm that warns you that you are not alone, that the forest is alive with watchers. Over the years, I've caught glimpses of them again. A shadow slipping between the trees. A whisper of movement that disappears the instant I focus on it. Each time, it's the same feeling, a mixture of fear and fascination, knowing that these children, though wild and unseen, are still learning, surviving, adapting. They aren't monsters, they're not the grotesque visions some of the older tales would have you believe. But they are something older, something patient, something that the forest molded to its own design. The backwoods children live in the hollow spaces of our lives, the parts we prefer not to notice, the edges we assume are empty. They remind you that civilization has boundaries, that life thrives beyond them, and that the human mind can only comprehend so much. I've walked trails and ridges for years, and still, the memory of that clearing, of two small figures staring at me with that unflinching gaze, refuses to fade. I've learned not to call it fear. It's a deep, insistent awareness, a knowledge that the world contains more than we are meant to see. Even now, when I'm at home and the wind moves through the trees in a certain way, I hear it, a soft, distant tap of tiny feet on leaves, moving just out of sight, always careful, always watching. I close my eyes and imagine them, small, wild, learning every contour of the woods, shaping the land in ways we cannot perceive. And I know, as I have known since that first encounter, that they are still out there. They are still living, surviving, watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel as though they have noticed me noticing them, and I feel the pull of the forest, the awareness of being observed, that quiet, inescapable knowledge that the woods never forget.